All right, let's talk about Tress of the Emerald Sea. And specifically, I want to talk about three major revelations that we learn about the Cosmere from Tress of the Emerald Sea. And just as a reminder, Tress of the Emerald Sea is set way into the future of the Cosmere. So after a lot of the events of the Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, etc. have concluded. And because of that, I think things happening in the background are particularly interesting for what they can tell us about what is still to come. But this video will include spoilers for Tress of the Emerald Sea, all of the Stormlight Archive up until the end of Wind and Truth, Mistborn, certainly Era 1 of Mistborn, and depending if you really don't want to know anything at all after that, maybe Era 2 as well. It'll also reference things or events that take place in Warbreaker and Elantris, but not spoilers for either. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, but before actually getting into it, I want to explain briefly why we know that Tress of the Emerald Sea is set kind of way in the future. And there's kind of two major technological developments that we see take place in Tress that really show that it happens a lot after Mistborn Era 1, certainly, as well as Era 2. For one, there's a literal rocket ship in Tress, or in the planet Lumar that Tress of the Emerald Sea is set in. That rocket ship is one that the sorceress arrives in onto Lumar and then leaves off Lumar as well. And given that we know there are some ways to travel off-world in Mistborn and Stormlight Archive, but we haven't really entered the space age yet, so the fact that there's a literal rocket ship flying around in Lumar suggests that we are deep into the space age by the time Tress takes place. The other reason is that we see some pretty advanced other tech playing out in Tress. We see specifically some advanced tech from Nalthis, the planet Nalthis, through the sorceress, for example. She and Fort have essentially like laptops or awakened predictive connection circuits, so like AI, that they're using in order for Fort to communicate, for example. We also see the sorceress's metal men, which are awakened soldiers that we see earlier versions of in Warbreaker. So again, like there's some tech that we've seen hints of in the past books, but that has really progressed to a pretty advanced level by the time of Tress. So with that, let's get into the three major revelations that take place that we learn from Tress and the Emerald Sea. First, the Irriali. The Irriali, we learn, were on Lumar, the planet Lumar, and had left about 300 years before the events in Tress are taking place. The Irriali, just as a reminder, are kind of like a nomadic group of world hoppers that are traveling through the Cosmere as part of what they term as the Long Trail. And in their belief system, the Long Trail entails like 7 different planets or places, and by the time they reach what they term as the 7th land, what they call the One will return. So potentially the reformation of the one god of the Cosmere or something else entirely. So if the Irriali were on Lumar, and if we take into the timeline that I just talked about, that means that the Irriali, that Lumar was the 6th land that the Irriali traveled to. They were on Roshar during the events of the Stormlight Archives. They probably then traveled, which was their 4th land. They probably then traveled to the 5th land, which I think may be Scadrial, given kind of hints that we see in Mistborn Era 2. And then the 6th land is Lumar, which was 300 years before Tress. And so by the time that the events in Tress are playing out, the Irriali have reached their 7th land. And so either they're going through some crazy stuff. Like either they've learned that this entire concept of the Long Trail was false and nothing actually happened at the 7th land, or they've seen the reformation of whatever the One is and are kind of dealing with whatever like the culmination of their belief system is, which is kind of crazy to think about. The second revelation is that even while the Irriali are probably going through some stuff attaining the 7th land, so are the Kandra. The Kandra are a species created on Scadrial by the Lord Ruler essentially to serve him, and they've served as, or they were essentially enslaved as spies to the Lord Ruler, and then later to Harmony. And what we learn is that by the time that Tress, the events in Tress are taking place, the Kandra have been freed of slavery, potentially by Harmony or by Sazed himself. We know this because we learn that one of the characters in Tress, Ulam, is a Kandra, and Hoid or Wit explains that the shapeshifters like Ulam have been getting quote-unquote weirder and weirder since Sazed released them. I love this because to me, this may be Sazed or Harmony's singular legacy that he leaves behind. The Kandra are kind of like near and dear to my heart because, as I said, they were created by the Lord Ruler essentially to serve him, and they've essentially been enslaved for their entire existence. And so I love that eventually Harmony does release them from that, and they're free to live their super weird selves, including on planets as remote as Lumar. And this is particularly important because I've talked about in my past videos that we see hints of Harmony turning into the worst version of himself, turning into Discord in the future. And so I think it's possible that Harmony, in kind of a last act, may have freed the Kandra to prevent them from going back into serving kind of an evil god. And so kind of a last act of protection for the Kandra and for the Cosmere. The third major revelation from Tress is that Hoid or Wit becomes an Elantrian willingly. This is important because in Elantris, we see people become Elantrian, but it appears like that process is seemingly at random. But in Tress, this is something that is more purposeful. Specifically, we learn, Hoid explains that in order to join the quote-unquote very select group of people that glow and can channel investiture, i.e. Elantrians, you need to be invited and adopted into that group. And he tricks the sorceress, who is also an Elantrian, into inviting and adopting him into that group. And the question is why? Why does Hoid want to be an Elantrian? I think it's because throughout the various books in the Cosmere, we've seen Hoid or Wit take on different ways to channel investiture. We see him become a Knight's Radiant in the Stormlight Archive. We see him able to access Allomantic powers in Mistborn. We see him learn how to draw breath in Warbreaker. So he's really accessing all of these different ways of channeling investiture, and becoming an Elantrian and being able to channel the door, i.e. another form of investiture, is kind of a natural outgrowth of that. It shows to me that Hoid may be seeking to channel all the various ways that you can access investiture throughout the Cosmere. To what purpose, I still don't know, but potentially they become the most powerful character in the Cosmere. So those are my 3 revelations from Tress of the Emerald Sea. One about the Irriali, one about the freedom of the Kandra, and the third about Hoid. So tell me what you think, and if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel and check out my other videos. I try to post on all things Cosmere as regularly as I can. And with that, thank you everyone.